Having watched the first 2 episodes of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I feel pretty confident saying this show's kind of awesome. And what I think is the most awesome about it, besides the visuals, which we'll get to, is that it is so much unlike any other Spider-Man thing I've ever seen, and at the same time, it feels so much like a Spider-Man thing. What I mean is this. I have seen the Spider-Man origin play out many different times in my lifetime. I have seen many different cartoons. I've seen 3 different movie universes, 4 if you count the Spider-Verse movies. I've played multiple video games where we see the origin of Peter Parker, and they're all more or less the same. Some have Gwen, some don't. Some have Mary Jane early, some don't. Some have Ned as a friend for Peter, some don't. But for the most part, the relationships Peter has, what inspires him to be Spider-Man, that is all almost always the same. And I think that makes sense, right? It's Spider-Man. If you're making a Spider-Man movie or Spider-Man show, there's certain beats you have to hit. And I think I've seen interviews with the people that worked on the show saying that it not being connected to the MCU gave them a lot of freedom. And I think that is fascinating. When I heard that originally, I was kind of like, yeah, I could see that. But it doesn't mean this event needs to line up with this event. And it's not going to be nerds like me saying, oh, he said he'd never actually heard of this guy, but then here he is with this thing. Like, that's no fun. I mean, it's fun for me, and it's fun for people who watch the videos. That's not fun for the people that make the show. Because people that make the show just want to make a fun Spider-Man show. So that's why I thought, I was like, okay, well, the nerds won't be able to complain. But obviously, you know, it's going to be a Spider-Man show. Any Spider-Man fan who knows their stuff can write down the beats of what the first season of a Spider-Man show is going to be. And certain relationships will maybe be tweaked a little bit, but like obviously, we're going to get the main things. He's in high school. He has a crush on one of the many famous Spider girlfriends like Mary Jane, or Gwen Stacy, or Liz Allen if we're getting creative. He's got a friend, sometimes it's Harry Osborn, sometimes it's Ned Leeds. He usually has a teacher who he's close to, it's like a mentor to him, a Dr. Connors or something like that. And then he's going to start doing Spider-Man stuff, start running into these other characters, and eventually you're going to find one character who's in both versions of his life. The Spider-Man version and the Peter Parker version. That's usually your Green Goblin or some connection like that, or Dr. Octopus in those Spider-Man games. Notice nowhere on that list was his friend Nico Minoru of the Runaways, but there she is here. Super weird. Completely different dynamic than usual. Or the bully character, usually a Flash Thompson type. And sometimes Flash Thompson is played like your classic push the nerd into the locker bully, and sometimes he's a more rich kid who makes fun of poor Peter Parker bully, but he's like a bully. So if Peter Parker knows a football player, it's him. Although in this, it's Lonnie Lincoln, and he likes Spider-Man, and he's dating Spider-Man's old babysitter, who is now this completely other character. If you're familiar with her, it is very interesting to see her come up at all. And then on top of that, you've got the relationship with Norman Osborn, and the idea that Norman Osborn, spoiler alert for episode 2, so these are the first 2 episodes I'm going to be reviewing, so I'm just going to talk about them, knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and isn't immediately like going to kill him, so he's going to try to, I guess, mentor Spider-Man the same way that Iron Man mentored Spider-Man, but he's Norman Osborn, he's a bad guy, so that's going to go in an interesting direction. But like, because this is a bunch of things that we've just never done before, we have no idea what direction that's going to be in. Is he going to be Green Goblin, or is this version of Norman Osborn just like an evil businessman who doesn't do Green Goblin stuff? Like, I could totally see that playing out here. And because this is so not tied to not just the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but any version of Spider-Man that I think fans of the comics and the movies and the shows are familiar with, that makes this show way more interesting. And I will say, I enjoy MCU Spider-Man. Like, I do think watching this show, you're like, oh yeah, this is what that should have been, though. Like, I think Spider-Man Homecoming is very fun and good, and showcases a version of Peter Parker that we had not seen before, and feels like a Spider-Man story. It does not feel like Iron Man Jr., as some people would call him. I do think, as things got more and more complicated, as you get tied closer and closer to the Avengers, the Spider-Man stories started becoming further and further from what this show is, which is like, Spider-Man has to go to class and has to fight a villain and pay rent, and, you know, he's got a girlfriend, and that is what happens in Spider-Man Homecoming. But like we're seeing in this show, you can expand on that. You can have the relationships play out with different characters, and I just think this is really cool. And honestly, part of me wishes it was in the MCU canon, because like, we're never going to get this in the MCU. Spider-Man can't go back to high school, obviously, but also like, he can't really just go back to fighting random villains the same way that he does. It seems like they want to do that reset, but at the same time, he also has to be really important, and his movies have to make a lot of money, and they have to be these big, giant tentpole movies, so they can't be the kind of small Spider-Man-y stories that is what keeps the balance of this character working. But I think the show is better for the fact that it doesn't have to deal with any of this stuff. And it's not like, oh, this is a pure Spider-Man story. He's not going to have any, interest in Tony Stark or Captain America. No. Captain America exists in this universe. Tony Stark exists in this universe. Doctor Strange and a being from another dimension that is credited, I believe, as symbiotic alien is where the spider comes from. It doesn't come from Oscorp. It doesn't come from Malcolm X. Actually, now that I think about it, I guess we don't know where the Tom Holland Spider-Man got his spider from. Like, we just know that he has spider power. That's kind of cool. And we never saw that play out. But like a full fight between symbiotic alien and Doctor Strange, who looks great. Like, this costume for Doctor Strange, we can do the yellow gloves. It can be done. It maybe will look a little weird. Maybe we have to pull back on the cloak a little bit, make that feel a little smaller. I don't know what it is. I like the Doctor Strange costuming. Don't get me wrong. They've always wanted to see the gloves, and yes, we got them a little bit in Thor Ragnarok, but like, I think they can be an actual core part of the costume. But I like that this takes place in a Marvel universe that exists, that is like the MCU, but because we know this is not the MCU, it's not predictable. We don't see all of the beats coming. Like, he may never meet Iron Man, and he may never fight the Vulture. We're maybe never going to do Vulture that way. I mean, he's definitely not going to the same high school he used to go to, and it does kind of seem like the way they set it up with this, portal opening and an alien coming through is a way to justify, like, it's kind of in its own universe, and maybe that's why it's like a fork point in the universe. Like, this is the universe where Doctor Strange accidentally sent Peter to the wrong school, and he became friends with all the wrong people. I'm not trying to do like a coping version of the, no, it is in the MCU, guys. This good thing is part of the MCU now. I guess it's just interesting that this thing that is definitely not really interested in, like, I don't think the Spider-Man's gonna be traveling the multiverse or anything like that, starts with Doctor Strange coming through a portal, and the alien, and the spider is from an alien dimension or something. Okay, let's talk about the big thing that I think is surprising a lot of people, the visuals. I think for the action sequences, the fight scenes, the swinging around, looks amazing. Like, really, really good. It kind of bugs me, and I completely understand why this has to be the way that it is. I think it looks a little empty. Like, New York is a specific kind of city, and especially when photographed in like Spider-Man things, what is important about Spider-Man is not just that Spider-Man is flying through this big sandbox, it's flying by all these people and they go, whoa, and that's like, and obviously we don't need to see every human face every time we look at a street, but I guess that does feel like a technical limitation or like a money limitation that I wish we didn't have to deal with, because I think it's the one thing that doesn't work for me visually. Is the thing, for most part, the action is great, very smooth, very fun, but I guess I wish that this New York didn't feel empty in a way that it kind of does. And I'm not saying that ruins it, just something that I can't get over. Also, things that don't ruin it that I can't get over. The faces are interesting. There's certain models for faces that I think from different directions look interesting. I think the Peter Parker and the Norman Osborn models look great. I think a lot of the side character models look interesting, but some of them don't feel, I don't know, I'm not the kind of person that's like good for critiquing animation. I'm sure there are people that will say, this model looks a lot like this model, and like I feel like the faces feel smushed a little bit. Some of them, not Peter's, but some of the other ones, but maybe I'm just crazy, I don't know. But what I do think is great is this story, because this is a version of Spider-Man we have not seen, and it's kind of like the version of Spider-Man that exists in a universe that treats Iron Man in Civil War like he should be treated. Like someone who is irresponsible and kind of a bad guy, and like setting Peter on this wrong path. And yes, at the end of Homecoming, Spider-Man rejects the suit and he's like, I'm gonna be Spider-Man. But also by that point, like, he's cool with Iron Man, he's gonna be an Avenger later. I feel like this breakup that's gonna happen between Spider-Man and Norman Osborn is gonna be big, and it is going to be way more dramatic than anything that happened between Spider-Man and Iron Man. I do really like the Spider-Man face, though. I think that face is great. And I think the costume is great. His silly little costume with the canisters being what makes the webs work the way that they do. I think that's genius. Let's talk about the themes. First of all, I don't know what version of this they showed. Hudson Thames, I think it's his name, the kid who does the voice for Spider-Man. This is the wokest Spider-Man thing I've ever seen. And in a good way. I think that it's doing interesting things with, like, race. It has set up a very eclectic group of characters from all over Marvel Comics, and we've got some race swapping, some gender swapping, all the stuff that people love to complain about online. And I think we're going to see, definitely with Lonnie's story, if it develops the way that you would expect it would based on who that character traditionally ends up being in the comics, some sort of arc that is going to mirror Peter's, and maybe it's hard to say exactly what that's going to be, but it feels quite woke. And now I do think, like, if Tom Holland came out and said that before the Spider-Man movie, I'm like, oh my god, that sucks. With this, it's like he's the voice of Spider-Man, but this guy is not going to be like, you know, I don't know, meeting kids in the hospital in his Spider-Man outfit and like going out, and I just don't think he's going to be the humongous. Like, it sucks that he says that, but I definitely don't think it's worth boycotting the show for. Also, mostly because it just is fully not true. This is a super woke. Just the fact that Nico is in it. Nico, a traditionally lesbian character who seems to be lesbian in the show, they've more or less said it, and Peter are like both kind of trying to date the same girl, and that's like a thing. I think that's great, but like, that's incredibly woke, Hudson. So I don't know what to tell you, man. Black Norman Osborn, that's pretty woke. It's great. Coleman Domingo is perfect casting. I think they would be foolish to not even try to get him to be the Norman Osborn of the MCU. I think that would be fantastic. Like, I think obviously he's a really talented actor who's very in demand now, and he's got all this awards buzz and all this prestige, but also I think he's doing something that is so different from what we have seen from Willem Dafoe. But this does feel very much like what Norman Osborn is supposed to feel like. He's got that cold, kind of distant demeanor. He's very serious, and obviously, you know, he's got the hair that only Norman Osborn seems to be able to have in comics. He's the only white guy that's ever pulled that look off somehow. It makes a lot more sense here. And like, I think Coleman Domingo is an actor who, if they brought him on for Spider-Man 4 or whatever, would be a get. Like, that would be a name that would sell this movie. So I don't know. I think they should do it, like, because I think it's cool casting. It's just it's incredibly woke. Like, it is one of the woker Marvel Studios things. It's the wokest version of Spider-Man I've ever seen, for sure. And that is good. That is a good thing. I'm going to get into this more in another video, but woke as a criticism or as something where it's like, that's too woke, it is always something that means so little. Like, if you give me a specific criticism, a specific thing that says, not just that the show is woke, but this show is bad for this reason. It focuses too much on this thing, or because of this character's race or ethnicity or whatever, they lost this part of the character. Then, hey, maybe that's something, you know? It's a critique. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a well-informed critique or one I would agree with, but that's like something you could say. The idea like, oh, this is woke, this is bad. It's almost like the same way people will say like problematic is a word that they will use to describe things, and it's like, it means nothing. It means it's a problem, but like, what's the problem? The context is what matters. And so like, I only say that because I do think if you asked him what is woke about this show, he would have no answer. Like, there is, the Spider-Man is white, I guess. That's the wokest thing about this show. But besides that, like, I don't know, man. It doesn't get much woker than this. A couple characters we meet in the first 2 episodes of the show that blew my mind. So obviously Nico Minoru is in this, which is weird because, and it's not a bad thing, but it's just interesting because this is a character, Nico Minoru, she's a runaway. She's part of the Runaways in the comic that this show has that exists. It's like a prequel, not prequel, but like this sets up this universe and is, I believe, supposed to be canon. She is adopted, or like she's a foster mom or something like that. So it seems like this is a Nico who is A, not from LA or whatever. She's in New York, but the rest of them. But B, like, seems to have just not done runaway stuff. And if she's not doing runaway stuff, that means she's not doing magic stuff. So if she's not doing magic stuff, it's like, she's just a friend. And she's, you know, she's cool. I like having her here. I think maybe she will do magic stuff in a way that's kind of roundabout. Like, I think we will get to a magical Nico, especially because, like, Doctor Strange was involved in, you know, the first episode of the series. But I just think it's interesting that Nico is here. And, you know, that's not a character Spider-Man's usually a friend with. And same for other characters. Now, if you don't want to know anything about what's going to happen with characters, and a lot of this is very telegraphed already, just you stop listening here. I'll tell you right now, after episodes 1 and 2, I really like this show. Thilani Lincoln, traditionally, this guy, Tombstone. He is one of the Spider-Man villains who is a mob enforcer who gets doused with a chemical, like you do, or something that gives him skin that is impenetrable. I think he also has like sharp vampire teeth or something. I don't know if he like files his teeth down, but either way, he is a big tough gangster. Usually has a relationship with Robbie, Spider-Man's boss at the Bugle. So that's something that probably won't happen here. But he's also like not usually the same age as Spider-Man. This is a character who is usually an adult when Spider-Man is a kid, because he has a relationship in the past with Spider-Man's boss. It doesn't matter because they're going to do something completely different here. They're setting up this really tragic figure who is nice and cool and everyone likes him and plays good football and is nice to his family and like is a nice boyfriend and has to deal with racism and stuff, and eventually something's going to give and it's going to be very, very sad. But like that is a completely new thing for Spider-Man. This relationship never exists in the comics. You got Osborn. Now obviously Osborn's different. Harry Osborn, these two I would say are pretty close to how they usually work in the comics, and did expect to see them. Kurt Connors, or whatever. We have a Dr. Connors. There's nothing that is more of a signal to me like, oh, yep, there we go, when someone is missing an arm in a Spider-Man thing. It is like Hot Tub Time Machine. Someone's going to be Kurt Connors here. Who is it? Oh, it's you. And that person is going to be the Lizard eventually. But it might be like the first 3 Spider-Man movies where they're just a scientist who knows Spider-Man. That would be completely, plausible. Like knows Spider-Man and knows Peter, as opposed to like becomes the Lizard. Speaking of lizards, the Wizard is in this. And the Wizard is a technology villain. I usually associate him more with the Fantastic Four. This is the character played by Paul F. Tompkins in the 2nd episode. I cannot remember his name, but it is such a specific name that the time Dr. Connors said his first name to him, I was like, oh my god, of course that's who that is. Bentley. Yeah, there you go. You got Amadeus Cho here, which is interesting because he seems to be like older than Peter Parker. And I would say, if anything, Amadeus Cho is like usually younger than Peter Parker. He is a younger version. Like he is part of a kind of class below Peter in terms of like there are kid heroes that idolize Spider-Man. He would be one of them, and he might show up in a Marvel thing soon, so it's interesting that he's showing up here. And then the one that blew my mind, Pearl. So when they said he's got a thing for his babysitter named Pearl, I was like, Pearl? Who in Spider-Man canon is named Pearl? Has there ever been like a girlfriend or babysitter? Is there like a villain who has a name that's like Pearl? And like genuinely could not come up with anything. I don't know if we got her last name in the show or just in the credits, but like it's like, oh, he's dating Lonnie Lincoln's. Like, does he have some sort of girlfriend, or like is there a woman named Pearl associated with him? And then part of me is like, oh, is Pearl, is there a man who this is the gender swap version of them? And then that's going to be, they're going to be like the villain in the future. Couldn't come up with anything. And then I saw his character's name. I don't remember if they said it in the show, but they definitely, it's on the credits as Pearl Pangan, which means this is the character Wave. Now, she is a Filipino superhero. She is very new. One of the characters, I think she was introduced in Agents of Atlas or like around that time. Very recently. She is from the Philippines. She is, doused with chemicals or something and has power over the water, but like nothing to do with Spider-Man. So it's so interesting that they're putting this together. And like that's the thing that's kind of fun here. When you have these weird little experiments, it's like, is she going to get superpowers and be a water-themed superhero? Are we going to get to the end of this season of television and we're going to have Spider-Man fighting alongside Nico Minoru and Pearl against Tombstone? Like, is that the end game? Like with the PS4 video game, you see starting like, oh, eventually Spider-Man's gonna have to fight Dr. Octopus. Like that's a classic Spider-Man thing. You could see the Dr. Octopus arc coming from a mile away. But with this, it's like, I have no idea what this is. And it is so fun. Other two that were in here, a Wakandan that I was not familiar with, but does have superpowers, does exist in the comics. The other character, Jean, is a character who is probably not going to come up again or be super important, but she does in the comics have Taskmaster powers, so she can like photographic memory. She can see you do something and then do it. So it's cute that she said, I'll probably forget you after this, because she won't in the comic version. Yeah, the character's name is Jean Foucault, and she's known as Finesse. That's her superhero name. She's not a character I would expect anybody to know. This honestly feels like a challenge, this show. And it's like a fun challenge. It's the kind of thing that I would like to do with pitches, is to be given a handful of Marvel characters, just this random grab bag of like, you got to figure out a way to make Wave and Finesse and the Wizard and Nico Minoru and Tombstone all part of Spider-Man's origin story. And they did it in a way that I think is pretty cool. It's also interesting, like the timeline this happened before Ben died. He got Spider-Man powers before he got to do the great power, great responsibility thing. Like that part of the timeline is interesting, but it definitely feels Spider-Man-y. And like, I am excited for kids who are going to grow up with this being their Spider-Man. Because I do think There was Spectacular Spider-Man, which obviously people love, and then a bunch of other Spider-Man cartoons that I think people enjoy, but I don't think we have had something at the level of Spectacular Spider-Man since then on the cartoon side, like just TV show cartoon. And I think that this is going to be that for a lot of kids, and if that's true, I think it's fun because they're going to just grow up with a completely different group of Spider friends. I like the things that they're doing with the Spider-Man. He does feel very much like the Tom Holland Spider-Man. He talks a lot. He feels like he has to be nice to people and like be friendly in a way that Spider-Man usually does. But like the idea of letting a criminal go because they learned their lesson and they're not going to do it again, like that's something that I feel like the Tom Holland Spider-Man would definitely do. Him having that fight in the pet store was cute. We have a spider dog now, just added to the list of pets for a video I'm going to be doing in the future. But like we got another one. And apparently Butane is a character who has existed in comics before. For a while I was like, is this supposed to be their version of the Shocker? But no, it's like, I mean, his name is Butane. He does have a shockery kind of like 2 gauntlets. And also like, what's that guy's plan? Just light the whole building on fire and then die in the building fire? Even though he seems like he's got, you know, padding and insulation and stuff, he's still gonna fall down when the building falls down around him. But I also think that's a really funny gag of like, oh, we've got the wrong building. He's not where he thinks he is, and he's like, this guy stinks. That's cute. It's fun to see the moments from the MCU, right? Like, obviously, there's the bit where Spider-Man walks home, and that one song is playing, and he sees who is in this, Norman Osborn instead of Tony Stark. But I also like seeing him catching the car and stopping it from hitting a bus bit that we see in Civil War that Tony Stark shows Spider-Man. It's fun to see that happen. It was fun that as that was happening, there's a thing that clicks in your brain, like, oh, that's going to be that. And then it is. It does feel like they went to a lot of work to like get this to line up with the MCU in some ways that I enjoyed. That like made my brain go, oh, cool, that. But I do think because it is not in the MCU, it does have a lot more creativity, and I love that. I think it's great. Also, speaking of MCU connections, is that Zach Cherry, aka Spider-Man Do a Flip guy, aka Shang-Chi on the bus guy? He better show up in Secret Wars at this point. Like, is there a fan theory that this character's like, I don't know, Molecule Man or something? Because like at this point, Robert Downey Jr. is playing Doom. Because screw it. Fan theory, this guy is Molecule Man. My reasoning is, I don't really have any reasoning besides I like him on Severance and want him to be in more of these. Like the costume a lot. Overall, very, very into this show. A very good start for the year. And I'm going to do another video next week on whatever random ass character shows up. Let's see. Who's this super deep cut that wouldn't make any sense? Let's say like Legion. The Legion will show up or something. We haven't had any mutants in the show yet. So, you know what? May as well throw a mutant or two in. Maybe not Legion, but like somebody. That would be cool. So, thank you for watching. And you know what else is cool? This video's sponsor, Nebula. If you've never heard of it before, Nebula is a subscription streaming service that me and a bunch of other YouTubers, a lot of people you're probably already watching, created because we wanted to have more control over our videos, we didn't want to have to cater to the algorithm, and we wanted to offer a better experience to you guys so you can watch all of my videos. They're all early. Some of them are like a full month early, some of them are like a day early, but every video goes up first on Nebula, and that is Nando V Movies, and that is the Nando Cut, both of my channels, and they're completely ad-free, so there's no ads in the middle, and there's no sponsor read at the end. And in 2025, we have so much cool stuff that we are working on. One thing that I am very excited about is a show called Abolish Everything. This is a live show that happens in the city where people come in and bring something that they hate, and they give a short presentation on why it should be abolished. Then a panel of experts goes in and questions them. And I'm excited for Abolish Everything because like Nebula, we have a reputation for being very smart. We have a lot of very, very educated people who do research and make documentaries, but we also have a lot of really funny people, and I am excited to see that side of Nebula growing. And I always say, a year of Nebula is a steal at $5 a month or $60 a year. But if you use the code TheNandoCut at checkout, you can get a year of Nebula for $36. It's a great deal. Check it out. Go to go.nebula.tv/TheNandoCut. Use the code TheNandoCut at checkout. I guarantee you'll find something cool you're going to like. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.